Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sustainability in the Sea, a podcast for ocean people by ocean people, hosted by me, Carissa Cabrera, and produced by FutureSwell. I am in beautiful Miami Beach for Aspen Ideas Climate, and I'm so excited to be here. I actually, the last episode of Sustainability in the Sea, we released an episode from last year, which was kind of like the debrief from my first time joining Aspen Ideas Climate. And I'm part of the Aspen Future Leaders cohort. So this is my second year as part of the Future Leaders cohort. And the weekend before, we all get together, all the young folks who were selected as future leaders, and connect and share ideas. And by the time this goes out, I will be home. But me and Bodhi are presenting on ocean solutions frameworks and successful campaigns for community-based ocean frameworks. So I will probably post about that when it's done. And thanks for listening. If you're interested about climate conferences, go listen to that episode. But I'm really excited for this episode, and I'm putting it out early actually because something intense is going on in the ocean. So it's March right now, but in Australia, it's actually summer. It's the end of summer. And so yesterday, so today is March 8th, but yesterday it was declared that Australia and the Great Barrier Reef are experiencing a mass bleaching event. It's actually the 5th mass bleaching event out in the last 8 years. So 5 out of 8 years have been experiencing a mass bleaching event. If you don't know what coral bleaching is, it's absolutely devastating our reefs. It's when the ocean gets too hot, and so corals get stressed out and they expel their symbiotic zooxanthellae, which create their food, and they turn white. So bleached coral reefs look white. You might remember that in the U.S., Florida experienced mass bleaching last summer, and it was the most intense historical bleaching that Florida has ever experienced. Coral Restoration Foundation played a really active role in ensuring that we didn't lose all of those reefs forever. And I just feel my heart's breaking that that's going on in Australia again too, especially because the Great Barrier Reef is so connected to heritage and identity in Australia. So coral bleaching is a global threat, but it's because we've experienced the hottest year on record last year, 2023. We also experienced some of the highest ocean sea surface temperatures ever recorded, as well as we're in an El Nino, which is making things even more intense. It's just extremely hot, and our environment and reefs can't take it. So all of that to say, I'm releasing this episode early because we interviewed a friend and colleague, she's now Dr. Yolanda Waters. She's an ocean advocate based in Australia, and she just finished her PhD studying social attitudes toward the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. She's also the CEO and founder of Divers for Climate, which is a nonprofit organization that she's had for a while since COVID, but she's just reintroduced it to be focusing specifically on activating divers and ocean communities that are affiliated with the Great Barrier Reef to activate them around climate policy. She's an incredible person. I met her originally. She was part of one of my Next Wave sessions, which was something I did during COVID. I don't know if any of you guys, the OGs. I had a virtual session where women talked to young women, and we all had a Zoom webinar, and she was joining. And I really wanted it to be global, and her voice is so important, and this episode is so important, and it's so timely right now because the work she's doing is such a key part of the solutions that we need to have to protect and save the Great Barrier Reef, which is irreplaceable and iconic. I dove it when I was in 2019 very briefly, and my hope is to go back with Alex and dive the outer reef, and I want to live in a world where I can do that, and where all of us can benefit from reefs. And so I'm not going to be on a soapbox about coral reefs. You guys know that I work in coral reef restoration, that I feel very strongly about the importance of coral reefs. So I want you to hear Yolanda's story today. And thanks for listening. Thanks for caring. I love you guys. Welcome back to Sustainability in the Sea. Hi, Yolanda. Welcome to Sustainability in the Sea.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I'm really excited too. So for those that don't know you, Yolanda's actually tuning in from Australia right now. What part of the continent are you tuning in from?
So at the moment, I'm currently in Brisbane. So this is Turrbal country down here in southeast Queensland. But normally I'm based up in Cairns, which is the unceded land and sea country of the Gimawallabari Dingi and the Irukandji people. So yeah, usually I'm based up there, which is much tropical and more ocean reef. Currently I'm stuck in the city, which is sad. But
I
yeah,
had
Queensland, Australia is where I am.
I had no idea you grew up in Cairns by the Great Barrier Reef. Do you feel like that was, wait, did you grow up on the Great Barrier
No,
Reef?
I wish. No, I grew up down south near Sydney, but then as soon as I realized I could go wherever, I went up there. I was like, people can live here. Um yeah, no, so I didn't grow up there unfortunately.
Could you tell us a little bit about your early beginnings with the ocean and how you connected to it?
Yeah, so my like I don't know if other like marine people, I didn't have like a amazing connection with the ocean to start with. I was terrified of it. I grew up not wanting to go in it. I don't know if it's because coming from like a small coastal town, like an hour and a half north of Sydney. Um, it's very like, I don't know, it's very beachy, surfy. It's a lot of white culture, I suppose. And I just didn't really fit in on the beach. I didn't like it. I wasn't a surfer. I was a good swimmer, but I never liked it. And I was scared of fish, scared of sharks, scared of seaweed, all the
Mm-hmm.
things. But then I think I had this experience, which I think a lot of people do, is my dad used to be a scuba diving instructor when he was younger. And he was like, well, you just got to go underwater. And I was like, hell no. Why would I go underwater if I won't even go like in the beach? Like, and so I fought him on it in a while. But eventually I went with him, and then my world just changed. I was like, oh, it's not scary at all. It's better. It's safe under here. It's
I can
and it
breathe.
wasn't even on the Great Barrier. It was just down in my hometown off the beach. And I think I got really lucky. Like the conditions were good. And the
Mm-hmm.
first thing I saw was a cuttlefish. And it's been my favorite animal since. And I think I was like, what is down here? Like, this is incredible. And things were just like, like it was just, I don't know, I felt like a much more peaceful and safe environment than I had pictured in my head. And from
Mm-hmm.
there, like, it wasn't like an instant, like, oh, now I love the ocean. It was a very slow burn, I think. I just never thought I was an ocean person until like the last like 6 7 years where I've been like, hang on, no, this is part of who I am. This is what brings me joy. This is what drives what I want to do. So
Wow.
yeah, it's probably not your typical ocean story. It's still a
No,
love-hate relationship a lot of the time.
yeah, it's a really critical ocean story because you don't need to find it young. My parents were not ocean people. It was something that was similar to a slow burn, the way you described. And also, I get so many messages from young women saying, like, I'm actually terrified of the ocean, but I want to try it, but I'm nervous. I just need people to go with.
Mm,
I just need someone to kind of help empower me. How old were you? Was that first dive where you saw the cuttlefish?
I was 13.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
still quite young, but like it was like one dive every like 4 years when the family
Hmm.
decided we'd go diving. So it wasn't like, yeah, but I think I definitely felt that you had to be a certain kind of person to be an ocean person.
Hmm.
And I wasn't that. So I was like, oh, I guess it's not for me. But then yeah, slowly like getting older and getting more into it. And I think the space is like ocean conservation, kind of that world is slowly diversifying. You can really kind of see that actually it's for everyone and everyone connects very differently and has very different experiences of the
Yeah.
ocean. So yeah.
I even feel like when we were growing up, it almost felt like it was just marine biology and ocean science. Like I didn't even
Yeah,
see, I was
exactly.
like, now I'm so happy to see people who are like, I'm an ocean conservationist and I have no technical background in this and I'm an advocate and I'm dedicating my life to this. And I think that's what's needed, you know?
Oh, 100%. And I had the same thing. I was like, for the longest time, I was like, oh, like I wish I studied marine biology. Like I can't do any of this. And then slowly, now that I work in the space, I'm like, oh, why did I wonder how many other people think they have to be that or study this thing to do what they really want to do. So yeah, I totally agree. Seeing more people be conservationists with all kinds of skills and influence is amazing.
Hmm. And especially like scuba diving is such a, it can be an aha moment for so many people to feel connected to the ocean for the first time. Do you, but it can be intimidating with how much knowledge you have to know to feel safe and like the equipment and all of that. Do you have any words of wisdom or advice about someone who's been wanting to get involved in scuba before, but is a bit intimidated by it?
Oh yeah, just I think find a good instructor or someone, a center
Yeah.
that makes you feel safe. Like some of them, like for like a small thing could even be finding a female led dive center. For me, that
Hmm.
really helps and makes a difference. Like a lot of all my instructors have been women. And I think because for a young woman, the dive space is still like incredibly male led. It's really male dominant. Especially at the higher levels. And I think just having that safe space and having someone who maybe understands your experience and they can kind of guide you through your own dive journey. Like it doesn't have to be like, here's the gear, get in the water, suck it up, do it. Um, yeah, I think if you can find, yeah, a place that, or a person that makes you feel like you can be safe and do it your way, I think that would
Hmm.
be my advice. But yeah, there's definitely those are out there. Just might take a bit of, depending on where you are, digging around.
Digging around.
Yeah.
Now I only do female led dive centers when if I
Yeah.
travel and go, I'm like looking for that. Um, how about your awareness around the issues and challenges facing our ocean? Like your first dip into conservation, was that a personal observation that you noticed as a diver or something that you were learning about when you were on dry land?
Yeah, so I wish that I came into it. Like I wish my story was like I went diving and I saw this and I went, wow, this has to change. But it was
Hmm.
very much like all of my like life like milestones have been just like moments where I was lost and had no idea what I was doing. And that's how I get where I am. So I did my undergraduate completely landlocked in Canberra, which is Australia's capital, but nobody really knows where it is because it's this tiny city that's like 3 hours from the ocean. And
Wow.
it's really, really cold in winter and really, really hot in summer. And it was a good time, but I don't think I ever go back there. But I went there and studied. I think I did genetics, like microbiology, and then I started in like arts. I then went to environmental science because my friend said they had really fun field trips. So I was like, okay. They go to the beach for like a week and just do workshops. I was like, that sounds perfect. So I went into environmental science, not being particularly environmentally minded. Like after school, I really wasn't like I watched like my younger sister's like 10 years younger than me, and her generation is like they're so switched on.
Right.
I look at them and I'm like, God damn it. And when I was finishing high school, all I wanted to do was like
Drink
nothing.
and
Yeah, I wanted to figure out like how much money do I need to save to go out on Thursday night? Like I'm just gonna go to uni. Like I was following the steps. I was really not politically aware, environmentally aware. Like I know I look back and I'm like, damn, what were you doing? But everyone has their own journey. Um anyway, so just cut me off if I'm rambling because I will. So I went to environmental science, and then that's where I kind of learned because I always was into like maths and chemistry and that, like the biophysical sciences, thinking,
wow.
I think what a lot do, like that's what I've got to do. But then in the environmental degree, I really, really that really resonated with me because it was a lot about people. And it was more about systems thinking, and it was about actually, science is great and all, but if there's no people to put into action or make decisions, like nothing happens. And people are complicated, there's society and culture and politics and all that stuff. And I was like, that really resonated with me. And so then I kind of fell into this more social science space. But then finishing my degree, I was like, don't know what to do with my life. What am I going to do? I guess I'll do an honors degree. And at the time was when the Great Barrier Reef just received, it was all in the news because it had gone through two back-to-back bleaching events. And the Australian government had given like $500 million to an organization to help save it. And it was very, very like controversial because it didn't go through a grant process. It was just like, have the money, do what you want with it,
Whoa.
but not climate action. Like it was just like, have the money. And there was a
Fix the
lot of
reef.
kind of yeah, it was everywhere. The reef was everywhere. And I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to work on the Great Barrier Reef? Like, it was just this. And then I had a supervisor at the time was like, you can do a project in the reef. And I was like, really? I have no marine background. I had no, like, besides having been scuba diving on family holidays, I had no official marine training. And that was that thing we spoke about before. I was like, I can't do reef stuff. But she was like, no, we can do it. Like, if you're interested in kind of social stuff, go up there, talk to people, you'll find a project. And so that's what I did. And I really started out in restoration because that was the thinking where some of that 500 million would go because
Hmm.
restoration had been a real thing in I think like Southeast Asia and maybe some in like Central America, but the Great Barrier Reef hadn't touched restoration at this stage. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to go see what they think about it. And in that time, I realized that, I talked to all these scientists, all these kind of practitioners about restoration. They're like, yeah, like it's great, but our efforts are going to be wasted if we don't address climate change. I was like, cool, what are we doing? And they were like, I don't know. Everyone was like, I don't know, that's the government's job. And I was like, well, I'm so confused. What do you mean it's the government? Why aren't we doing anything? And then that was my like aha moment. Um, and then after that, I was like, I don't want to be in academia anymore. I went to work
Mhm.
in the dive industry in Cairns. And then with that in my mind, I was like, oh, this is really like, no one's talking about climate action. Like this dive world, everyone's really passionate about marine stuff, but like no one's talking about the need to, stop fossil fuels. And I was just all these like little moments when I did all my courses, when I worked on my boats, when I did my instructor training, like you do the patio wear stuff. And I was like, whoa, this is missing. And that's kind of how I fell into what I'm doing now. And that's how I got into the PhD in Divers for Climate and just kind of, yeah, fell into it, met the right people at the right time. And I've totally forgotten what your question was.
No, that is so
Sorry.
important. Don't even. That's
From this
exactly
like
what
love
I
story, you go.
No, it's deeply resonant of like what my experience has been in ocean conservation, where they're like, well, we're
Yeah.
doing all these resource management and there's so much to learn and so much to understand. And you can do a research project and then specialize and do this your whole life. But then they're like, oh, but then there's also this really big statistic that it could be gone very soon,
Mm,
forever. And you're like, oh, great. What are we doing about that? And they're like, that's not us. We're scientists.
mm,
We're trying to better understand it. And I think that to hear that that's going on at the Great Barrier Reef too, and that there's these thriving industries in Hawaii. Obviously, our surf community is so strong, and it's like the activation point is missing, and that was why
yeah.
I felt like the organization and work that you're doing at Divers for Climate is so important. So what came first, you going back for the PhD or you starting Divers for Climate, or are they
They came at the
intertwined?
same time.
Why? Why'd you do that?
Why? Yeah, I don't know. No, well, I guess like that's so interesting to hear. Yeah, the similar thing because I mean that's why I follow your work, and there's slowly more people popping up that I think have been realizing this the last couple of years. So it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of so good to connect and be like, okay, like there's a gap we can fill for sure. Um, yeah, so it was this after I kind of did a year and a half, like traveling and working in the industry and just enjoying, taking people for their first dive and all that stuff. But slowly getting frustrated that not much was happening. Re like climate action. I was like, this is mind blowing. Like, I think in that time the reef bleached again, and I was like, what, what is going on? And so I found this supervisor, and she kind of did some reef stuff, but social reef stuff. And she had just
Mm.
released a paper that surveyed 4,000 Australians. And the question was, if you could do one thing to take action for the Great Barrier Reef, what would it be? What is it? Can you list an action? Basically, it was. And just like keep in mind, surveys before this show that Australians, the majority know that climate change is the greatest threat to the Great Barrier Reef. They can accurately identify it. The majority of Australians are concerned and believe we should be protecting it. So those are like other surveys around Australia. But this one, less than 5% of those people in that survey could name a specific climate action that they could take. Less than 5%. And I was like, this is despite being able to say climate change is the greatest threat to reef. There was
Oh
like
my God.
more than like 30 something percent were like plastics, I'll reduce my plastic. There was a lot of I don't knows, but less than 5% could identify a specific thing they could do. And I was like, what?
Wait,
So anyway,
were these general Australia was these
this is the
people
Australian
who were
public. No,
just
this is
general
just
public?
general Australians. But then I was like, that really resonated with my experience in the dive world, where I was
Mm-hmm.
like, it's not a lack of knowledge or passion or concern like that's there. I definitely felt that was there mostly. It was that when it comes to like action, people, it's so easy to grab onto those more tangible actions, right? Which makes sense because it's just easier to understand, I suppose. The plastics, the restoration, all that kind of really tangible stuff you can see making an impact straight away. And that stuff's all important. But I noticed there was a real kind of knowledge gap and hesitancy and uncertainty around what actually is climate action. What does that mean for me? I have no idea. And then hearing her do that research on the Australian population more broadly, I was like, wow, okay. What else do we need to know? How do we, because on the reef and in the dive community, there's this huge narrative, which I'm sure you're familiar with, like if you just experience it, if you just see the magic of the ocean, if you just go under there, you'll be inspired to protect it, and you will. Like that seeing, knowing, doing
Yeah, like
perspective.
you, yeah, but you're like I'll okay, this matters to me now because of the
Yeah.
experiences I've had. But were you finding, I've always thought about this, on like if you're on like a dive charter and they go do a dive and they're just having their incredible moment, and then after,
Yeah.
is there like there's such an opportunity for there to be like, and this is what you can do.
Yeah. So this is what my PhD was on. So after our chatting with my supervisor, I was like, okay, well, but maybe people can't identify the action, but there's clearly something going on, right? Like just from my own experience watching people dive, like you see them go, whoa. And I remember my first dive experience. I was like, whoa. And I was like, sure, like to what extent can we leverage that? To what extent is that useful in engaging more people in something that is as complicated as climate change? And so I kind of started the PhD, kind of trying to ask some of these questions, especially like the Great Barrier Reef. It's one of the most iconic systems in Australia, around the world. And I was like, to what extent does it actually move people to action? And, if there's a challenge somewhere, how do we overcome that? Like, it's definitely something's going on. But this was around COVID time. And so I was stuck in a studio apartment,
Mm-hmm.
trying to research like what are my PhD questions. And then because I was on Instagram all the time, like there was a lot going on. And I was getting just more and more frustrated. I was like, where's this? Even online, I wasn't really finding the climate diving kind of ocean narrative as much. And then I know there's a group called Surface for Climate here in Australia. And I was like,
Oh yeah.
is there a dive group? And I was Googling it. And I was like, there's no dive group. So I literally just got the Instagram account. I was like, Divers for Climate's available. I'm going to take it. I had zero plan. um, so all this kind of happened at the same time. It was all just kind of a lot of like could definitely see the gap and the potential. And I think at that point, as I was developing the research questions, a group called Girls That Scuba let me do a YouTube video for them, being like ocean conservation and climate action. And from that, I had a few people be like, yeah, I'd like to join Divers for Climate. And then it just slowly grew as like this online community of divers from around the world. We had no plan really, just to chat, set some webinars, write some blogs, just be like,
It was like a
I don't
group
know,
chat, or like a group.
yeah, it was just like, hey, we've noticed this thing too. Let's just make a space for it. And that's kind of what it was for 3 years as I've been doing the PhD.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, so they
And
kind
there's
of came
an
together, and they're both kind of, as the PhDs ended, Divers for Climate has remained like a community group through the PhD, mostly because I just couldn't
yeah.
couldn't do much at the same time. But now that the PhD is done, we've just registered as official organization, and we'll take it. Like it's kind of like the practical outcome of what I found in my PhD as well. So yeah.
Wait, so you immediately noticed that there was a very clear demand for this niche that's being carved out. Because
Yeah.
people were like, I'm a diver and I know I already don't use straws or whatever, and then I'm looking for a community of like-minded folks. Concurrently, when you were carrying out your PhD, also, I cannot believe your PhD is only 3 years. In the States, they're so long and unnecessary, and I don't
Yeah.
know why. It's like the biggest
I couldn't
hindrance.
do it it was 3.5, and I could not have done it for longer. By the end, I was like, take it from me. Like I love my topic, so and I still wanted to be like, I never want to look at this ever again.
They can be like 7 years here. I'm like, what
Yeah,
do you
that's
mean?
wild. That's
But
a lot.
so were you, for your PhD concurrently, were you doing public surveys, kind of like what was done previously by your advisor?
I've done a mix of stuff. I did a few national surveys. I did a bunch of kind of online experiments.
Mm-hmm.
We did some tricked people into some stuff.
What'd you
Well,
find?
ethics proved. I'll tell you in a moment. Yeah, I also did a lot of in-person surveys, interviews. I basically people watch and stalk tourists on
Nice.
boats as they experience the reef, which I think is the greatest fieldwork ever because I just went for 6 months and people were like, what are you doing? And I was like, science. And I'm just sitting there like chatting, going for a swim. Social science is good.
Ah.
Yeah, a lot of interview surveys, like online experiments. Basically we're testing despite this idea that places like the reef inspire, there's actually no research on it. It's just assumed. And because I think there's a real, people don't really value social sciences as like a as
Yeah.
much as it should, as a real form of getting data.
Yeah.
And like these things are actually not just common sense, like people are complicated. And so the first thing we had to do was prove that there was potential, like that these places have something going on. Like,
Mm.
why am I doing a whole PhD that's like the reef inspires climate action when there's no evidence that it might? So that was the first step. So we started, there's two things we did to start was I did a survey of Australians online. It was an experimental messaging kind of thing. And we showed people some messages about the reef and climate change, some just really generic climate messages, you know, like the world's burning, some just unrelated things. And we mixed and matched a few different kinds of things. And then we asked them their willingness to do a bunch of climate actions. We had some sneaky things in the survey, like did they click on this? Did they sign this petition? Like to kind of measure whether those different messages change people's kind of willingness and kind of, it's hard to measure actual behavior through an online survey. So we call it like proxy measures of
Mm-hmm.
behavior. Like did it indicate that one message was doing more psychologically than the other? And we found that yes, like people who got the reef stuff were more likely to say to yes to a range of things. Um, and we found that that was particularly true if the message highlighted the collective, like if it really focused on we can do this rather than you can help the reef, you can do this. So we found that that kind of message was significantly more effective for a range of actions. So not just getting people to turn off their lights, but getting people to say they would talk to others, say they would write their MPs, to sign petitions. So a range of climate actions people can take, compared to a really generic message. So we're like, okay, the reef's doing something. And I really thought, we tried to figure out why. So there's a bunch of questions in those surveys to figure out, well, if it's better, why is it better? Like, what is it that's getting people? And I originally thought it was to do with place, right? People connect with this
Yeah.
magical icon, like especially as Australian, like it's a icon of like national pride here. Like I was like, it's to do with place. Turns out it wasn't. It was to do with grief.
It was to do with
It was
what?
emotion, grief. So we actually found that negative emotions was really driving that kind of the reef message to climate action. It wasn't
Oh.
hope. It was feelings of sadness, worry, and anxiety, which is kind of interesting because I think there's this fear to embrace negative emotions. You know, people
Mm-hmm.
don't want to go down a doom spiral, but it's kind of necessary. Like it is an important trigger for action. But I have a suspicion, and we didn't prove it in this study, this is just my suspicion, is that because we framed it, the messages were framed collectively and kind of with a pathway for the future. Like the so it's not directly hope, like we measured hope and that wasn't the thing, but it kind of, this mix of seeing what's possible and that action can be taken, feeling sad is kind of the pathway to action. But yeah, so that was the first thing we did, to say, okay, the reef's doing something. There's definitely something's happening, not quite sure what, but this magical icon, this marine icon is a more powerful storyteller than just generically talking about climate change. Something that a lot of people I speak to are like, duh, obviously. And I'm like, yeah, but well, I put it in numbers.
You're like, we got to set the foundation of our understanding
I,
first,
I
okay?
scienced it. But and then the next thing we did was, okay, if that's an online message, what happens when people actually go to the reef, which is where I went and stalked people on the boats for 6 months. Which we did the same. So I was lucky enough to work with tourism operators. And on some trips, they let me put a lot of climate messaging on the boat. So I'd work with the marine guide, they'd give a presentation. Some days they'd include climate change, like stuff about climate change, and some days not. And then posters, videos. Because there's also this big concern. I don't know what it's like where you are, but here there's a big concern about how much to talk about climate change in the context of tourism because it might stop people from coming.
Mm.
Like there's this real concern that real people, like people pay a lot of money to see the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah.
Um, but there's this real like, no, people are on holidays. I don't talk about climate change. Also, like they don't want this message to get out there that it's affecting the reef because maybe people won't come. So there's this real like, no, I don't want to talk about it. So I was kind of looking at to what extent does the reef and this experience can engage people in action, but also like, are there any negative consequences? Because that's something that tourism operators really want to know. And we found that no, there's absolutely nobody was like, this will ruin my day. Actually, we found the opposite. People were like, I thought we'd have more information.
Oh my
People
God.
were kind of, yeah, people were like, like, yeah, like I came to the Great Barrier Reef. I've obviously heard about it on the news. I know what's happening. Like most people are more like quite reasonably aware, especially the ones that choose to go there. They're like, I don't really know what's happening. I've heard politicians, scientists, media, but like I trust you to tell me because you work here. So there's a lot of kind of,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the public was like, I'm open to more, tell me more. And the number one thing they want more of is action. Like, what can I do? And yeah, and then so we found that the climate information that we put on there, it was enough to, the people that got it were more likely to be like, climate change is a threat. I want to know more. But it didn't really make them more likely to take action. I think that's because we didn't really, it wasn't designed for action. It was more testing like, what is the potential? Like, what are the opportunities here? Do people
Mm-hmm.
want it? To what extent do they want it? And does it have potential in shifting minds? Um, yeah, and we found there was a real link between having that information, seeing really cool stuff, and feeling those feelings of like kind of worry for the reef. So that was a real kind of, those were the ingredients that we found to be really important. So it's not just seeing the reef, but also being told what to do,
Mm-hmm.
and what's happening. So you kind of need that, that's kind of why, like, I love this whole dive world that's like, no, just experience it. It'll, that'll inspire you to protect it. The experience is just one ingredient. It's a big one because not everyone has access to it.
Mm-hmm.
But the second one is the information, and providing not just information about the threat, but about the action and the pathway forward. Because most people are feeling quite like, I have no idea what to do. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's something that's kind of, out of my whole thesis, that was kind of the biggest takeaway, that like, yes, the reef, it's got huge potential, these experiences, huge potential, but they need to be actively supported by that information. And that's kind of where tourism comes in, and working with divers and tourism operators and dive centers and all that, to be like, you've got this magical thing at your doorstep that, only if you're trained to go there, you can really do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you've kind of got this huge opportunity to, you've got this public who's concerned and wants to know more. You've got this experience which will hook people in, and then you just need to be the kind of message giver and storyteller to be like, here's how we move on from here. So
Following
yeah,
through. I feel like that's extremely valuable for anyone listening who's working in their own conservation or climate project,
mm,
because going back to the tourist thing, like I feel like from my perspective of the ocean lovers that I know, there's actually just so much urgency to go to the Great Barrier Reef if you haven't gone already, because
yeah,
it's you feel like there's a clock associated with it, which would almost drive, more tourism. But
yeah,
then I see the fact that there's, if you're telling someone who's been, going there and diving there their whole life, like they're seeing it like be degraded over time, maybe like I understand the fear perspective of it. And then with the negative emotions, there's a very strong narrative on social media that you need to remain very optimistic and cover solutions only. And I think that there needs to be both, because some people respond
for
differently to other
sure.
things. And we're experiencing this now locally with advocacy, because we've had some devastating wildfires, which I know you're intimately accustomed to as well in Australia. And it's like, are we going to use like that story as like this could happen again, which is a very real thing? Or are we
Mhm.
just going to completely focus on inspiration and hope? And I think it definitely depends on your audience.
Definitely. And I think it's like there's this kind of push to find like which is the driving emotion, but yeah, there isn't one.
Yeah, it's all.
It's definitely a mix, and it's definitely context dependent, right? And that's a similar narrative that's going on in tourism, the Great Barrier Reef. You've got kind of some advocacy groups and scientists being like, it's going to hell, like we have to do something now. And then you've got tourism who's kind of like, we're doing all this great, they are doing great stuff, but we're doing all this restoration, we're doing all this like engagement with First Nations people, we're doing all this like work to protect our patch, right? To which is, but they're kind of done other things. They've gone for hope and solutions, and the other half has gone for we are doomed. And so
Damn.
it is kind of like, how do you find that, like, no, things are not looking great, like they're doing okay for the moment. Like the reef still is huge. I think a lot of people forget that it's
Yeah.
like the size of Italy. Like it's massive. And so if some patches are struggling, there's other patches that are stunning. And like so tourism's still really good out on the reef, but like it isn't looking great the next 10 years if we don't take more action now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you've got tourism who on the other hand is like, no, 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 it's it's not fine, but we're doing all that we can, which
Mm-hmm.
doesn't include climate action, but we're doing all that we can. Don't worry about it. We've got this. And so it's kind of like, well, what's the,
The intermediate.
yeah, how do
Yeah.
you find the middle ground, and how do you kind of empower people to get behind it? Because I know that the hope and optimism and solutions isn't, people want to get behind that because people are feeling really like, oof, this is not going to be good. But then I guess another question, like, to what extent is that helpful? Like, if everyone kind of, yeah, that there's still that aspect of kind of there's still something coming.
What for the actions you provided during the study design, were they like participate in coral restoration activities, or was there, what were some examples of the ranges that you provided? Because I'm curious to see if it was something tangible that they could do that day or on their trip, or if it was like, and also email your elected official.
Yeah, so like in all my studies, so I've defined individual climate action as a range of personal, social, and political actions. And my kind of goal was to see if we could use the reef as this tool to connect people with actions that they don't connect with oceans. So I didn't put any kind of no restoration, not even plastic. I didn't want anything that people kind of already go, oh yeah, reef, because that might influence why they pick it. Whereas I wanted to be like, no, to what extent can something like this magical, because most people can't list climate. They have no idea what they go, okay, I guess I can drive my car less, great, but they can't actually, it's really hard to see how much potential an individual actually has to take all kinds of actions. And so the kinds of actions I did were, I tried to steer away from too many household actions just because there's already a lot of research on that. And personally, it's not where my kind of thing is, well, the reef is, if there's this tool for collective action, we want more social and political action. So I really focused on, would you share information about this with a family member? Would you be willing to sign this petition? Would you be willing to look if your bank invests in fossil fuels? I was really trying to kind of see if it would get people to click on those things. I did a few with plastic as well, just to see. And obviously, like, it's a lot easier to connect the dots in your head to be like, oh, reefs, ocean, turtles, plastic. But get your bank to not invest in fossil fuels, there's a few missing dots there. So I was like, if the reef could help bridge some of those dots, if what do we need to help people get there? So yeah, those are the kinds of actions that I asked people about, which was a little bit scary. Sometimes I was like, I don't want to ask this person about fossil fuels. It's like older couple like sitting on their cruise on the Great Barrier Reef, and I'm like, hi.
Hey,
Do you
what
want
do
to
you
talk
think?
to me?
Are you ready to divest from the people
Yeah.
facilitating our demise? They're like, what are you talking
Yeah. But I had like the first few trips I did, my supervisor was like, Yolanda, are you just asking the friendly looking people? And I was like,
about?
no, yes. She was like, no, you have to ask everyone, it's otherwise it doesn't count if you don't ask everyone. I was like, oh, okay. I
Oh,
remember,
goodness.
but I remember this one guy, this like older white guy. He looked really grumpy. And I was like, oh my God, I do not want to ask you about climate change. But I went up to him and I was like, oh, I'm Yolanda, this is what I'm looking at. And he was like, oh, yeah, those electric vehicles. And I was like, oh my God, here we go. I'm not ready for this. But anyway, we started talking about electric vehicles, and we ended up in this conversation about how empowering women is a climate solution. And he was all
Yes.
for it. He was like, yeah, I really think that if we kind of get more women in leadership. And I was like, this is not where I thought this would go.
You just got to
But
find the in.
we
Just
had a
got to
great
find
chat
it.
about how solving climate change is not just about electric vehicles. Like, there's a range of things that can help us. And we ended up talking for like half an hour. I like didn't get many surveys done that day because I was talking to this guy, and I was like, it was one of those moments. I was like, wow, like, you just never know. You really never know what people are feeling, thinking, how they kind of conceptualize climate action. And it was, some of those chats really opened my mind a lot, I think.
Yeah. I also think, like, I remember learning about how just talking about it and having a conversation can be a tangible pathway to, like, almost like destigmatizing it in certain
Yeah.
environments. And that if we were all just more open about it, because most people, like you said, are pretty reasonably informed. They kind of know it's an issue. And it's like, you can actually we can just all talk about it a little bit more, not in a way that has this like political tone. Or I get the same
Yeah.
way with you, um where I'll be like, oh my gosh, you don't want to have this conversation with this person, but then you're making if you reduce the ability to make assumptions, you realize like, oh, actually we all have something in common.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like the talking about it is like one of my favorite actions to tell people, like just personally, not through research, but but it's kind of like what we said before about having to do marine biology, right? People think they have to be an expert to talk about it.
Right.
Like they think I have to be an activist, I have to be a science person, I have to know all the current like policy debates going on. I have to be in tune with politics. And like they think if you don't know all that, you can't start a conversation, like you can't talk about it. Which I get. It's like a totally rational kind of concern, but also trying to kind of break through that and be like, everyone's kind of thought about it. It's passed through everyone's mind. Like, just open it up and be like, hey, like this concerns me. I don't really know much. What do you think? I've heard this. Like, I don't know, or just kind of being open to having those chats or learning more. Yeah, I think it's huge. And like talking to this guy about like women as climate solutions. I was like, I wonder, that guy definitely was not expecting to have a half an hour climate talk on his day, but now it's in his mind somewhere, hopefully in the back. But it's just those small kinds of, yeah, we do all have a lot more in common than we think, I think. Like nobody wants the reef to burn.
Right.
I would be absolutely shocked to meet anyone that was like, no, I want it to die.
Yeah, no one's saying that.
No.
So you finish your PhD and you want to re-envision divers for climate. What is that going to look like now?
Yeah, so last year I had some like crazy experiences in like the climate space and met some really interesting people who are like, this has potential. I can see it, but if you want it to make like a tangible difference, you're gonna have to do it properly. Because I was like, I don't want to make a new org. Like, there's already enough orgs out there. Like, I don't want to be any kind of leader. I just want to like coordinate the group. But
You're
then
like,
like they were like, but you could have a real impact, but you just need to like set up the foundation properly. And so I've spent the last 6 months on this crazy learning journey, feeling like a child again. So much imposter syndrome.
so humbling. So
It
humbling.
is figuring out how to form a board, how to register a charity, how to talk to donors. Like it's been crazy, but we've now officially registered as a charity. We've got a vision, we've got a board, and we've got a plan. And I
Wow.
guess I was always kind of like, no, I just want to be a global group who talks about stuff, but kind of um, we've kind of reeled it into Queensland, Australia, so we can prove that we can make a difference. And then I guess long term will be no, we're divers. Divers are very transient; they move around, so
Right.
we'd have a real opportunity to expand quickly, I think, if we wanted to. But our plan for the next 6 months is to work on our identity and our story and our brand and build the community up. And so we've got kind of 3 initiatives going. We just won a grant to make a short film, which is really exciting.
So exciting.
So we're working with a team based on Heron Island here on the reef, and some tourism operators up and down the Great Barrier Reef to kind of document our stories. Because if in the climate space, and this has blown my mind, the conversations the last 6 months, because it's been very much with like the Australian climate movement and the big players in there to be like, where can we like, how can we fit in the best? And there's no ocean people. There is no ocean narrative. They were like, oh, marine heat waves. And I was like, what?
No, you're like, no, it's actually like a
I was like,
ocean
and you
planet.
get really, you get really stuck in your bubble. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course I've got friends that have footage of some bleaching off this island because they work and live there. Like, and they're like, really? And I'm like, my mind has been constantly blown by like, they're like, and I would start the dive story really kind of like in it, like this is what's happening. But they would be like, oh, but tell us how you got into diving. Like, tell us about that ocean journey. And I'm like, why? But because they
Yeah.
haven't been exposed to it at all. Like, it's not in there. And then the more and more I have those meetings, I'm like, wow, okay, this is like A, what? And then B, like there's huge opportunity because you've got this whole community of divers that is actually seeing stuff happen, that is out there every day.
Mhm.
And it's like the ocean, like it's this whole untold story in the climate movement, especially here. I know globally it's that case as well, but like especially in Australia, and where like everybody lives on the coast here. Like most of our population
Right.
lives on the coast. So it's been a lot of mind blowing, like, wow, our story needs to be told. And so that's what the film is. It's like, let's just get our story out there. So we're filming some climate impacts, interviewing tourism operators. We're filming some of the workshops that we're doing. So we're also running workshops like just really open, like how do you talk about climate change to tourists? How do we talk about it in the context of diving? Just kind of to get people's feelings and what they'd like to learn. And we're doing a lot of that. So filming our story, and then our plans to launch World Oceans Day in a screening event and a panel, and where we invite a bunch of people from the climate movement, politicians,
Mm.
media, and be like, hey, this is the story that you're missing. We're going to tell it. This is our voice. Because also I think there's a lot in the dive community where people are already doing amazing things, but are still not convinced it's enough. So like I've met like restoration people, coral scientists who are like, yeah, like I do all that I can, but I know that, you know, unless we address climate change, like it's just not enough, but I don't know what else to do. And I guess what our new goal is to take all those stories and be that pathway to be like, there's all this stuff happening. There's these people doing their best. They're super concerned. What they need is you, the decision maker, to do it. And so that's kind of our new kind of remit, is to be like, let's collect those stories and voices from the dive industry and the dive community and take it into the offices of decision makers and make them watch it, talk to them. And so the plan is to use the film. We have an election in October in Queensland, which is Australia's most conservative state. And so the plan is to use the film in a series of events to kind of start rallying political support for stronger climate policies. We don't know exactly what our asks are yet. So that's kind of something we're working on, to be like, how specific or broad do we be? Like what exactly are we asking for? And then, yeah, so that's our plan. And we have a federal election next year. So hopefully like the plan is to build it up in Queensland, then next year make it national, and then that can kind of build, I guess, build this sense of like, we have this hugely powerful story that has been, it's really big in our community, but it's really underestimated everywhere else. So to be like, hello, like I know everyone's watched Australia burn on land, but have you seen it burn underwater? We have.
Because both are. And I
Yeah.
found, first of all, I'm so incredibly inspired and about what's ahead, and the fact that you've been building Divers for Climate while doing your PhD just shows that all of this is just beginning. But I just want to underscore how truly impactful the strategy you're going for is, because Florida, which is an extremely conservative region of the US, there was this legislation that was passed using the same framework that you just described. There was a screening. It was an opportunity for the local community to chat with the elected officials. The elected officials didn't know much about the stories, didn't know the personal issues, didn't know any of that. And they ended up just learning and then feeling inspired by it. They brought their kids. It was family friendly. And then the advocates talked to the kids, and then the kids talked to their parents. And it was like extremely, it passed unanimously, which was unheard of for environmental legislation.
That's
and then
so amazing.
I don't know how it is in Australia, but the ocean is relatively depoliticized here in the US at this point. And so, like, if you say electric vehicles, it's like a trigger word kind of for conversation. But if you are talking about the ocean, it's something that everyone can get behind protecting. And so, using that language strategically is so helpful.
Yeah. Oh, that's so, like, congrats with that. That sounds amazing. Like, I'd love to interview you and be like, any tips?
No, it was just,
any words of any lessons? Because that's, I mean, watching your work and some others I've done similar kind of, like, we have this advantage in the ocean. We have this like really strong storytelling aspect, which I think can move a broader audience, like exactly like you just said. And I think that's really powerful. And I guess still mind blown that hasn't been done
I
more.
know. I know.
I'm like, how is, like, the last 6 months has been like, because I was like, oh, I never wanted to make this a proper org. Someone's probably already doing something, like we're just
They're
doing
not.
whatever.
No,
They're not.
they're not.
They're not. And I was like, do we have to do it? But then it's been really inspiring, like finding us, been really scary, being like, okay, we're doing this properly. And like they were like, it needs a face. And I was like, I don't want to be the face. But I was like, okay, whatever, let's do it. And I was like, oh, what if people don't like the idea? But people have been so behind it. Like people from the dive community have been like, I think we need this. Like we're all kind of, everyone's feeling a bit like they're doing all that they can, but it's not enough. So like we're being like, okay, well, if we can channel that into some policy action.
How can
Yeah.
how can folks listening that aren't in Queensland support Divers for Climate?
Yeah, good question. And this is something we've been like, we're still grappling with this whole like local, global, because divers and like a lot of the people that work in the industry here in Australia are here on like working holiday visas. Like they don't have like in 3 months they'll be somewhere else, but they might still want to be part of it. So it's kind of like, how do we do this at the moment? Just like by following our work. We have a crowdfund raiser going at the moment. So part of, I guess, trying to make sure that we can sustain Divers for Climate going forward is we're looking for like donors and sponsors, but also we're trying to do a crowd fundraiser to help with the film. That's our first kind of tangible outcome that we want to have is to make the film, and we're going to make it anyway, but it's obviously going to be better if there's some money behind it.
Yeah.
So we've got some money for it, but yeah, we have a crowd fundraiser. It's up on our Instagram. We've called it Hot Dive Summer. We're a totally female-led group as well.
Rad.
Those are fun chats. Yeah, just small donations, or just if you can't donate, because I know the world's crazy always, but just like sharing it, kind of sharing what we're doing. And eventually, once we've kind of grown, this year's kind of our like proof of concept year to be like, we can do it. Eventually we want to grow and start collecting stories from everywhere, from concerned divers, and see what we can do with that. Yeah, the more people we have behind us, and we can show, hey, we're actually, yeah, there's like over 6 million. I think it's actually like 8 million divers in the world. That's huge. Like
That's
if every
huge.
single diver could be like, actually, this is a problem for me. Can you fix it? I think that would be huge. Like just to have a collective voice like that. And like I looked at some, it's really hard to find dive stats, but like I know Patty has listed like over 4,000 dive sites. Most of them are things like coral reefs and kelp forests, which are all going to be gone in the next 10 years if we don't take more drastic action now. So it's like over 75% of our dive sites. And you add on top of that, like extreme weather events, boats being cancelled, sea level rise for low-lying islands where a lot of dive tourism happens. Like it's a huge, I think there's a huge story there and a huge community there. And if, yeah, the more that get behind it, I wish I had more tangible actions right now, but we're so early on. But watch the space.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
definitely watch the space. I can't wait to see that film, and just definitely an incredibly needed niche to fill. And that, and folks listening, like there's so many of these niches, right? You just can go out and find it. So all right, we finish every episode with the same question. It's we ask you if you could put a message on a billboard that all of the most powerful people could see, what would your message say?
Oh, that's so hard.
I know. I always drop that bomb at the end. I'm sorry.
Oh no, my mind is totally blanking.
No, because it's hard to choose.
The decision makers to say.
um, I always use Dr. J. Nichols from the Blue Mind Theories answer. He says his was getting water, like because the
Yeah.
ocean has so much benefits to our mental health. But yeah, what would yours be as a social scientist, as a diver, as a climate advocate?
I feel like I'm overthinking it way too much right now. um, I don't know. I think it would just be like to share your story, like speak up. I think a lot of people feel they don't have a story,
They do,
and
yeah.
like, and like even I've, meeting people, they always go, okay, 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 but like, what can I actually do? Like, I don't have time to make it my full job. Like, I don't really want to join a group. And I'm like, well, like, why do you care then? Like, what's your story? Like, why are you asking me? And then, like the other day, there was a guy who was really into like coffee or coffee farming. I don't know. And it was just kind of like, well, yeah, find your way in, tell your story, share your story. I think that's more of what we need. And it's like what you said before, the whole talk about it, and I did an interview recently, and they were like, what would you tell to people who want to, how do you connect more people with diving so they can take action? I was like, you don't have to. Diving's not for everyone. Like the ocean might be a way in for a lot of people, but it's still not for everyone. There might be a different way in for different people. So I think just the more people that share their stories, the more entry points we find. And that's the more likely we can get a hold of a decision maker that, that triggers something that they care about or that
That they
their
resonate
community
with.
cares about. So it's the more entry points to action we have, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. We need conservation entry points. And it also with the stories, it's like I find myself being like, well, someone else should be telling that story a lot, a lot. And at the
Yeah,
end of the day, we just need all of them. And with the way that
exactly.
stories are being shared nowadays, it's there actually is room for all of them.
Definitely. Yeah. And there's that huge, like, kind of imposter syndrome, like, oh, this isn't my story to share. It's like, no, everyone's story is like, this is a thing that affects all of us. So everyone's story is valid. Please share it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for coming on Sustainability in the Sea, Yolanda.
Thanks so much for having me. I feel like I want to ask you questions.
You got to start a Divers for Climate podcast coming soon.
Yeah.